Welcome back to State of the Nation. It's the story that won't stop, Donorgate. Yesterday we discussed the fact that Starmer's dates didn't make sense after he tried to throw his son under the bus by suggesting that Lord Alli's £18 million apartment was used for his son to study for his GCSEs. We also discussed the fact that the apartment was used for Starmer's COVID broadcast when it was decked out to look like his own home, even with pictures of his children in it. However, since then, more developments have emerged. The Guardian reported on the story after having been briefed by Number 10 that it understood the flat was used for the COVID broadcast as a one-off. 37 minutes later, the Guido Fawkes news site, Clever Old Guido, revealed he had also used the one-off apartment for his broadcast tribute to the late Queen Elizabeth II. This use of the apartment does not appear in the Register of Interests, and it's intriguing to try to speculate what was wrong with the Reverend Starmer's own home for these broadcasts. Perhaps, like Ed Miliband, he has two kitchens or some other embarrassing luxury. And now it emerges Lord Alli, owner of the apartment that was once allegedly used just once, was also lent to Wes Streeting for another Labour Party happening. Does this poor man, or rich man, ever get to sleep in his own flat? He also lent the Labour MP, Siobhan McDonough, £1.2 million to buy a house for her terminally ill sister. So the real question is, what does Lord Alli want for all of this? The nature of these donations is interesting and distinctly personal. As I've disclosed before, any donation I ever received were for the Conservative Party of my local association. None was for me personally, nor did I take freebies. But Lord Alli's donations are deeply personal and cover apartments, loans for houses, frocks, spectacles, and even a holiday let in New York. The only real explanation is that the Labour Party is seeking to buy a cohort of people over whom he hopes to exert some influence and have some measure of connection. If he just wanted to support the party, he could have donated to the party as a whole or to individual Labour associations. But he chose to use his cash to build close relationships with the most powerful people in the country. As Stephen Glover said brilliantly in today's Daily Mail, he's not distributing freebies to ordinary folk on the Clapham omnibus. So what do we know about him? Well, not only does he not talk to the media, we know he doesn't much like the media. When asked questions at the Labour conference about the scandal, all he said was, "Please don't. This is not very nice." He's a member of the House of Lords. He's a public figure. Not very nice is a bit wet. In 2013, the reticent Lord made a speech calling for a new offence to deal with press intimidation as well as a press regulator. He went on to criticise Blair for his close relationship with the tabloids. But if we learn anything from the Hugh Edwards or Mohammed Fayed stories, it's that our media laws already work in favour of the rich and powerful far too much. We have oppressive libel, privacy and contempt of court laws which stop the truth getting out. And people such as Lord Alli seem to want to crack down even more on the free press, free media. So the question is, will Lord Alli use the undeniable connections and influence he now has over the government to pursue his anti-free speech agenda? Only time will tell. But any movement towards press regulation from this government must be treated as highly suspicious. Let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by the former political editor of The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh, as well as my most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the journalist and Conservative peer, Lord Goodman. Trevor, let me come to you first, because over your many decades as a political correspondent, did donors usually want some influence, or did they do it because they were worthy figures distributing largesse without hoping for anything in return?
You're suggesting altruism. The thing is that Lord Alli is a very shrewd businessman. The Labour Party itself may be, the paymasters for that may be the trade unions, but the cabinet itself, the most important decision makers, are bought and paid for by Lord Alli. All the evidence suggests that there's hardly anyone of any status in this cabinet who hasn't benefited from the largesse of his enormous estate, whether it's in New York or in the penthouse flat that he has, or whether he's buying apartments for people or giving them frocks, as you say, and glasses and clothing for their wives. Every one of these things is a personal gift which makes people personally liable to feel grateful to him. And what will he get in return for that?
What difference does it make? Does it make a difference that he gave money, cash, benefits to these individuals? How would he use that influence? How would you expect somebody to use that influence?
Well, I think that they are all now beholden to him. And I think that when you have access like that, he may have paid £1 million into Labour Party coffers over the years, but the influence and the access that he's obtained as a result is priceless. It's beyond price, because that means that he has the ability to say to people who owe him something, even if they only think it's a bit of gratitude, that he's been very kind to them, even though it's very valuable kindness, they owe him something in return. And if he suggests something, they're going to take it very seriously.
Well, they'll at least take his telephone call, so he'll have the opportunity to suggest it, which somebody who donated a similar amount to the Labour Party generally might not be in such a good position to do.
No, and I think that one of the things that worries me, and has worried me since long before the election, is the tetchiness, the thin-skinned nature of Keir Starmer and some of his cabinet. And I think Lord Alli is one of those. He takes offence very easily. He doesn't like the press, and he's proved this in the past when he was Crown prosecutor. He dragged 24 Sun journalists through the courts of the biggest courts, the highest courts in the land, on trumped-up charges of conspiracy to misconduct in public office. Now, the whole point that we've learned over the Harrods affair is that the CPS maintains that it will not prosecute unless it's pretty sure of a conviction. Every single one of those journalists was acquitted. And in the end, the Lord Chief Justice stood up at an appeal hearing and asked the CPS, had they considered the freedom of the press?
And this is what we know is Lord Alli's one political view, that he doesn't like the freedom of the press, and we know that Starmer isn't very keen on it either.
No, and I think that he's made one speech of any significance in the House of Lords in his more than a decade in that office, and that has been about curtailing the freedom of the press. He wants us to be regulated by a state regulator instead of the IPSO system, which is a voluntary and effective process of regulation. And I think that as these stories drip out and are given front-page coverage day after day, week after week, it seems, and possibly month after month, and also coming, as they are, almost certainly from someone very closely involved with this government, with enormous amounts of information, because none of these things will be known to outsiders. It comes from within. He will want to stop that. He will want to gag that press.
Nigel, let me come to you, because if a trade union leader gave £10 million to the Labour Party, of course he could ring up the leader of the Labour Party. But it's a very different professional relationship to somebody who's given you your spectacles, that friendship is a much more direct way of influencing than a professional relationship, isn't it?
Yes, you're right. And I think that the friendship bit is the key here. I'm not sure the spectacles were such a good idea, by the way, because I don't think that MPs of any sort should accept expensive gifts. In the case of Lord Alli, for the last 30 years, he's been very close to senior figures in the Labour Party. It goes back to Tony Blair's time. He was close to Blair. He was close to Angie Hunter, who was Tony Blair's gatekeeper, the kind of their version of Sue Gray, basically. So it's understandable that because these people are his friends, that is where his largesse would go. Then when you nail it down, it depends on which bits we're talking about. If you're talking about Wes Streeting having a fundraiser at his flat, that to me seems perfectly reasonable.
I agree with that.
If you talk about Siobhan McDonough getting a £1.2 million loan to buy a house that her sister Margaret, a former General Secretary of the party, great friend of Lord Alli, was dying of a brain tumour, needed a bathroom and a bedroom downstairs, that to me seems to be perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, even though it's a very large amount of money, I don't disagree with that either.
It's the gifts that are the problem.
And I know one or two people who aren't completely poor. One or two of whom have been generous enough to make donations to my Conservative Association for election campaigns. But not one of them's ever rung me up and said, can we give you a new suit or a pair of glasses? It just seems so odd to have that relationship with your friends.
Which is why I don't think that when it comes down to gifts that they should be accepted. That's the bit I don't understand. I don't mind Keir Starmer taking the football tickets. I don't mind the hospitality. Those are things that are very difficult to try and police, because where do you stop? I think an expensive gift is a different kettle of fish. You're meant to declare them over £300. It may be that either you stop them happening at all, or you reduce that figure to £50.
Well, the media handling of this has been atrocious, hasn't it? That they've allowed this story now to run for a fortnight. Every day there's a new allegation. And you get to the point where something like Wes Streeting having a fundraiser, which in and of itself is perfectly harmless, just adds a little bit of more fuel to the fire.
I think that is looking at it the right way round. And my interest isn't so much in Lord Alli, it's about the Labour politicians declaring the gifts. So the old-fashioned view taken by Enoch Powell, who you're going to be discussing later, was that actually you didn't need all this declaration at all. I'd be quite interested in what you as a sort of old-fashioned constitutionalist thought about that. But if you are going to have these rules, the MPs must declare what they're getting. And the extraordinary thing about this whole business has not been just that Keir Starmer's the top claimer, but that all sorts of details are now coming out which they apparently didn't declare. So the sort of mystery is, to me, how can they have been denouncing our party in opposition in the way they were, but behaving like this? And I think the answer is that they simply think, because they're Labour, that they're morally better than everyone else and entitled to all this stuff, whereas the wicked, bad, evil old Tories are not.
And the declaration by Rachel Reeves, admittedly not from Lord Alli, was that address was office support. That's a very odd way of describing office support.
I'm trying to imagine what Reeves or Starmer would have said if Liz Truss's husband had required a suit for office support.
Let that thought hang in the air, because we've got to move on. But thank you to Trevor and to my panel.